And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, if my therapist isn't connecting, should I take my pants off? And with Aaron Carter and Melanie Martin splitting, will I finally be able to meet Aaron at the gas station for some delicious Doritos and methamphetamine? And now, the podcast host who proudly wears his Crocs at the Board of Education meeting, Pete Dominic.
Yes, indeedly do. I'll wear those Crocs wherever they will take me, which, by the way, is anywhere you want to go because they're almost indestructible. All right, folks, it just became an ad read for Crocs. Look at how I just improv out of whatever announcer Pete Co says and then get started on with the show, and we are off, and I am happy that you are here. I went to bed early, 8 p.m., got up early, 3 a.m. to finish the show because I was real tired yesterday. I didn't get to take my nappy poo. And so on days like that or nights like that, I'll try to get the podcast up by 6 a.m., which is the goal for today. So let's get it underway. I want to welcome today to the show for the first time, two guests, both joining me on the podcast for the first time. Nadine Farsad is an old friend, and she's joined me on the old show many times. I've been on her podcast, Fake the Nation, several times as well, and we both done stand-up together over the years, so I know Negin pretty well, and I love her, and we had an awesome conversation. So happy to have her joining me for the first time. And I've never talked to my second guest who joins me today. She is a doctor from California who is also a stand-up comedian and the co-host of a new podcast with actor Sean Hayes from Will and Grace. Her name is Dr. Priyanka Wali, and the podcast she's co-hosting with Sean Hayes is really interesting, where they do it once a week, and they talk to a celebrity about some kind of health issue that they had, and they take a call or two. It's really interesting, and she's an awesome guest, a fascinating woman. We talk about her life. We talk about the obesity epidemic a little bit, as well as several other things that I think you're really going to enjoy. Both my guests today, Nadine Farsad, Priyanka Wali, they are both first-generation American women from Iran and India are where their family's from, and I'm super excited to share my conversations with both of these brilliant women. And speaking of health issues, I got my physical results, and guess what? My vitamin D is deficient, very deficient. Anybody else out there with very low vitamin D? They shamed me that it's very low. Your vitamin D is very low. We're starting you on a supplement right away. And then also, my cholesterol was a bit high at 146, whatever the hell that means. So I'm changing my diet and exercising more. And what else can you do? If anybody has any advice for my serious health issues that I've announced, I'm all ears, whatever works for you. standupwithpete@gmail.com, and we can talk about that and make fun of me tonight at our hangout. Usually do it on Thursday night, but we're doing it tonight, Wednesday. If you're a Stand Up with Pete Dominic subscriber, you support the show with a paid subscription, you get to hang out with us. And we hang out for like 2 hours, and we talk, and it's really, really fun. And I don't think anybody does it like we do. I don't know. I don't know why it's so great, but it always is. I would imagine it's because it's such a great group of people that show up. Really funny, thoughtful, kind, passionate, and you don't have to say anything. You just hang out and have a drink and chill out and listen to Kerry Williams interview his father, which is what we've done the last couple of shows. Legendary guy. All right, well, let's get to it, shall we? I've got a lot to talk about in today's news. It's time for The Last 24. All right, well, the big story yesterday was not that Chris Cuomo has been suspended from CNN, nor was it the news that we learned from President Trump's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, that Donald Trump knew he had COVID a few days before a debate with Joe Biden. No, that's because the big story yesterday is a nightmare, horrific story coming out of Michigan, where there was a shooting at a high school and 3 students were killed. And it's too hard to talk about on today's show. I haven't really read enough about it, though I've read a good bit. I did talk with my daughter Julia, who's 14 in 8th grade, about it last night because I didn't want her to hear about it on social media or from her friends. I just kind of broached it with her. She gets anxious about such things, and so I'm careful. But she's maturing, growing up, and feeling more secure in her space and in school. But it's hard. I just can't imagine how hard it is to be them and have to be thinking about this as a potential possibility in their schools. But my advice is to talk about it with your kids, age appropriately, and not avoid it, because it's really easy to avoid. They will find out. They're going to find out everything. And don't you want them to be able to talk about it with you and not just wonder why they might be concerned or anxious or bothered? That's how I see it. That's how many of you have advised me to do it. So that's how I share, or why I share my parenting advice here on the program whenever I can. I may be wrong, but that's how I'm doing it. And I talk with gun policy experts quite commonly here on the program. Chris Brown at Brady, Shannon Watts at Mom's Demand, Igor Volsky at Guns Down. I highly recommend you listen to those interviews from the archives and continue to take action and heed their advice to bring down gun violence and make it harder for easy access to guns, which it certainly seems to be an issue that we are way behind on, given the Supreme Court and the decisions that they continue to make about guns. All right, well, here is President Biden yesterday addressing this shooting in suburban Detroit, Michigan, which is actually right near where my wife grew up and went to college in Oakland County.
I learned about a school shooting in Michigan. We learned, as we learned the full details, my heart goes out to the families enduring the unimaginable grief of losing a loved one. Apparently, there were somewhere in the order of 9 people shot, and three, I think, are dead. And the young man, I think, as I understand it from staff, is about 15 years old, and he turned himself in and just said he claimed his right against self-incrimination and handed over his pistol. That's all we know about it. But you've got to know that whole community has to be just in a state of shock right now.
Great to have a president who can be the consoler in chief, who can express empathy with the victims of horrible crimes like this. Again, in Oxford, Michigan, 3 students killed, 6 people injured, a 15-year-old gunman arrested. Apparently, the 9mm Sig Sauer used to kill the students and wound 8 others was bought by the 15-year-old suspect's father last week. And so it's possible that the suspect's parent could face charges related to the use of the dad's gun that he freaking just got. And more statistics, Shannon Watts at Mom's Demand tweeting, between 2009 and 2018, the U.S. had 57 times more school shootings than other major industrialized nations combined. This year, there were more deaths and injuries between August 1st and September 15th than any other back-to-back school time on record. Pundits will say the solution is more guns. Well, it's a failed experiment. There are 400 million guns in the hands of civilians. Here, if more guns made us safer, we'd be the safest nation in the world. And finally, Shannon Watts tweeting, this isn't freedom. This isn't happening in any other high-income country. No other nation would tolerate this. We don't have to either. Text ACT to 644-33. That's ACT to 644-33. Use your voice and vote to stop gun violence. And there have been many laws put in place at the state level. Of course, the question does become the Supreme Court, but we can't do nothing. We can do something, and certain states and certain restrictions and certain laws obviously make a huge difference. So stay on board and don't look away from this, because it's too easy to turn away from other people and other communities' pain until it becomes yours. I'm not going to do it. I hope you won't do it. And that's all I've got for you on the shooting in Oxford and gun violence in America on today's show. Well, let me follow up that tragic news out of Michigan with some great news for the country's children living in poverty. Because yesterday, the Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, testified at the Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs, and she gave some great news. Thanks to the American Rescue Plan's expanded child tax credit, food insecurity has gone down by 24% among America's families. Here is our riveting order of a Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen.
The American Rescue Plan's expanded child tax credit has been sent out every month since July, putting about $77 billion in the pockets of families of more than 61 million children. Families are using these funds for essential needs like food. And in fact, according to the Census Bureau, food insecurity among families with children dropped 24% after the July payments, which is a profound economic and moral victory for the country.
Translation, Congressman Jim McGovern says it's working. It's also proof that ending hunger is possible if we focus on political solutions that deliver real results, he tweets. And he's an old friend of mine. I should get him on. He's been fighting food insecurity his entire career as a congressman from Massachusetts' 2nd District. I'm going to reach out to him today. Let me jot that down. So that's good news, folks. That's what we call good news. It's working. And here's some bad news. I've got audio of Mike Pence. Trigger alert, this is the former vice president of the United States of America, which seemingly nobody likes. Like, I think he has no fans or supporters anywhere. I'm surprised he gets invited anywhere. But here he is talking about the left's celebration of women's reproductive rights.
Today, many on the left believe it is a moral good, that abortion is to be celebrated and encouraged, even as it was on a recent broadcast.
A recent broadcast of what?
Of Saturday Night Live.
Oh, yeah, great pause. Another long pause here.
It's not hard to imagine that the day will soon come when the radical left begins touting abortion as a tool for managing population growth, as the Chinese Communist Party has done for decades.
Well, we've been doing that for years. I've been doing that for years. Just didn't. The difference is we don't force women to get an abortion. That's the major difference. We say, hey, it should be readily available for women to terminate a pregnancy that they don't want, and that will help reduce the world population, which wouldn't be nearly as much of a problem if we had a more equitable ability to distribute food and energy and necessary resources for human life. But since it is an issue, that is one way to reduce population, of course, is to control unwanted pregnancy. So, sorry, we've been doing that. We've been doing that for a long time. The difference is we're not mandating abortion, and nobody on the left is supporting a mandate. That is even worse to some extent than what Republicans do. Well, maybe it's not. I mean, do the Chinese force you to give birth to a baby that you were raped to create? I don't think they do that. Wait a second. Maybe we are worse. Well, we are pretty bad, because if you've been paying attention to the horrific accusations and allegations and comments being made about Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who is one of the first Muslim American women to ever serve in Congress, by Republicans like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert and so many more, including plenty of commentators, then you would be horrified, I would hope. Yesterday, Ilhan Omar raised the stakes at a press conference where she actually played the audio of a voicemail message that was left for her at her office. And I'm going to share this from her press conference yesterday because they are powerful and they are important. And I think that they are absolutely horrifying. And I think it's important for people to hear it and know what is happening, which is why she came out and played them. And you might question her playing this voicemail into a microphone for all to hear, but I don't. I think it's a really important thing that she did for obvious reasons. And again, trigger warning, this is some pretty horrible language. This horrible man calls and threatens her life and calls her an N-word and more. But Ilhan Omar played it, and so I'm going to play it for you right now. Slightly edited.
I'm going to play you a voicemail that we received hours after I got off the phone with Representative Boebert after she posted her video.
We see you Muslims saying nigger bitch. We know what you're up to. You're all about taking over the country. Don't worry, there's plenty that will love the opportunity to take you off the face of the fucking earth. Come get it, bitch, you fucking Muslim piece of shit, you jihadist. We know what you are. You're a fucking traitor. You will not live much longer, bitch. I can almost guarantee you that we, the people, are rising up, and you will be tried for a military tribunal, and you will be found guilty.
For those of you who did not hear it very well, let me read you what the voicemail says. We see you, sand N-word bitch. We know what you are up to. You are all about taking over our country. Don't worry. There is plenty that would love the opportunity to take you off the face of this effing earth. Come get it. But you are effing Muslim piece of shit. You are jihadist. We know what you are. You are effing traitor, and you will not live any longer. Condemning this should not be a partisan issue. This is about our basic humanity and fundamental rights of religious freedom enshrined in our Constitution. Marjorie Taylor Greene, now a member of Congress, who came to my office in 2019, harassed my staff, demanding that my colleague, Rashida Tlaib, and I retake our oath of office on a Christian Bible. That says a lot about somebody who says she believes in the Constitution, because she obviously hasn't read it. It was never an option for me to take off my hijab and run. And that should never be something that a Muslim woman or a girl in this country has to contemplate if she wants to enter public life.
All right. Well, a really powerful press conference yesterday in Washington. Ilhan Omar playing the voicemail message, then reading the voicemail message to give it even more power and I think probably attention. She wanted us to play it, I'm sure, which is why I shared it on today's podcast. A lot there, a lot to unpack. I asked Nadine Farsad about that and play Lauren Boebert's clips for her today's show. Negin is a Muslim American woman, and she hadn't heard this, so that's coming up later on. We'll revisit it one more time. I think it's really important and consequential what's happening right now in the Republican caucus of the House, much less the right-wing commentators who are fueling this kind of hate and rhetoric, which is obviously turns into violence all the time. You see it all the time. All right, well, let me switch gears one last time and get to some COVID-related audio, this is a really interesting clip that I got from CNBC. Jim Cramer, who is an old friend of mine, I used to work on his show, Mad Money, for like a year. I worked on that show or longer, warming up the audience for the live performances. We did a whole college tour. My friend Ben Ratner now helping produce that show. Anyway, Jim is a really unpredictable guy. He's hard to put into a box. He's a very eccentric guy and has all kinds of weird ideas, which is a big reason why his career and certainly his program has worked at CNBC. But listen to what he says on yesterday's show as a result of the Omicron variant and what it's done to markets and the economy here, the COVID in general, but how the threat of this new variant has affected markets. Cramer is done, and he has decided that the President of the United States has to mandate vaccines the way Eisenhower did with polio. Here it is yesterday, CNBC, Jim Cramer going nuts.
He wants to be the bad guy. So we've allowed a pastiche of uncoordinated health organizations to dictate an on-again, off-again series of measures that mostly just leave us baffled and confused. We haven't centralized the issue to the point where the White House actually seems to take responsibility. Let's see, first was the CDC, and then the FDA, then the National Institutes of Health, mostly coordinating policy through talk shows. Then we left vaccination policy to individual companies. Now it's toothless OSHA going back and forth on what's allowed in factories, but nobody with any power is saying the frontline workers need to be vaccinated. It's just plain wrong, and most of us are sick of it. Even as a vocal anti-vax minority is always grabbing the mic. This charade must end. The government must require vaccinations, not of this group or that group, not company by company, not cruise ship by cruise ship or airline by airline or governor by governor. The buck stops at the White House. Some of us are old enough to remember when we were told we had to get a needle stuck into our arms because of some disease that was so scary we were afraid to talk about it. The disease was called polio. No one knew how you got it, but you were scared to go to a place where anyone might congregate, a swimming pool, a park. Then we got a vaccine that worked, and President Eisenhower said we would end polio. He pulled it off because he didn't give us any choice. Soon after, as if the needle were too hard, they came up with a sugar cube. They being the scientists at the time. And we lined up and took them, too. Mine tasted like maraschino cherries. Yeah, like the Del Monte fruit cocktail my mom served, but only better. Lord knows what happened if you didn't partake. But back then, anyone who refused to get vaccinated would get ratted out immediately because we knew that person could hurt other people. Now we're engaged in a similar struggle with COVID, and Eisenhower would be aghast. We have immunocompromised people who are incubators for every variant to come, walking around lawfully unvaccinated? That's psychotic. We have companies that have tried hard to get people vaccinated and now backing down. We have governors who want to be president by grandstanding on a foolish states' right issue, the right to get sick, get other people sick. So it's time to admit that we have to go to war against COVID. Require vaccination universally. Have the military run it. If you don't want to get vaccinated, you better be ready to prove your conscientious objector status in court.
Yep, easy for Jim Cramer to suggest on his CNBC show where all he has to do is be interesting and try to be informative, but a lot harder to do in real life politics because, as he said at the beginning, nobody wants to be the bad guy. Yeah, Joe Biden mandating a vaccine. It's not the Eisenhower days anymore. He wasn't up against Fox News and an army of Republican or conservative or conspiracy-laden commentators each and every day warning all kinds of crazy ideas in the mainstream. That was only on the fringe, some guy shouting on his steps. Things have changed, and the political realities, I think, are not taken into consideration by Jim Cramer there or by most commentators in general. So let me get to another clip. It's Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, out there rallying his people, trying to do his best impression of a former prime minister. You know who I'm thinking of. Trying to inspire people to go out and get vaccinated, get that booster one more time so we don't have Omicron all over our nation, slowing us down and killing our people.
So whenever your turn comes, get your booster and ask your friends and your family to do the same. It's time for another great British vaccination effort. We've done it before, and we're going to do it again. And let's not give this virus a second chance.
Listen to Bojo on that one, folks. And here is the Fed chair, Jerome Powell, finally. He was also yesterday on Capitol Hill letting policymakers know, no, we don't anticipate a lockdown because of Omicron the way we saw back in March 2020.
We're not thinking, and I'm not thinking, that the effects on the economy will be remotely comparable to what happened last March with the shutdowns, or that there will be additional shutdowns. We've tried to adapt. We're focused on maximum employment and price stability, and we've tried to adapt our policy as we've moved along. We'll continue to do that.
And then there is Senator, eye surgeon, and man with seemingly a real psychological issue, Rand Paul.
It is sort of like you are now contradicting the all-high priest of science if you say anything. But there are real questions, and there's real areas of science that he's never really debated because he deflects. One area is over 100 million Americans have had COVID. They have natural immunity. There's a real question about whether they should be vaccinated once, twice, or not at all. And the thing is, there's never been a debate because he's the all-powerful scientist. You're not to question him, just do as you're told.
Well, it's a fair question to ask whether or not natural immunity is better than vaccination or how it compares to vaccination, but he is not the high priest of anything. Scientists are. Well, let me calm down and take it back a step. Nobody's the high priest of anything, including scientists. It's the consensus. It's the best research. And since I don't do research, I let other people do it who do it for a living. And nobody, in my opinion, is better than Dr. Aaron Carroll at looking at the best available research. Here he is from yesterday's episode of Healthcare Triage, his award-winning YouTube video series, with a new video that dropped titled COVID Natural Immunity versus Vaccine Immunity. I'll just give you about a minute of the 4-minute video that he posted yesterday on YouTube.
If you gain some immunity from COVID-19 by contracting it, and if breakthrough infections are possible after vaccination, should you even bother to get vaccinated? The answer is yes. We're hoping to help you understand why. That's the topic of this week's Healthcare Triage.
Yeah, I love the jingle. I like the intro jingle for Dr. Carroll's YouTube videos. Here he is.
To begin, no one is arguing that being infected with COVID-19 doesn't offer you some immunity against the disease. That's given. What is not given is how much or for how long. Considering the data available at the time this video was shot, it's unlikely that someone who's been infected with a mild case of COVID has come out of it with more immune protection than someone who's been fully vaccinated. It's possible that getting a more serious case offers higher protection, but this would likely vary between individuals, and if getting longer-lasting immunity requires getting severely ill, that doesn't seem like a winning choice. If you're standing at a fork in the road with the decision to either risk natural infection or get vaccinated, and you're concerned about the potential risks of vaccination, you have to weigh the potential risks of natural infection as well. While we have an idea of who is more at risk for severe disease in general, there are simply no guarantees. Risking infection to gain so-called natural immunity means you're putting yourself at risk for severe disease. Maybe you'll get lucky and get a manageable case of COVID, and maybe the odds are even in your favor in terms of age and health status, but gambling with your health can be scary. And while some perceive vaccination as a gamble, your risk of side effects in the vaccine are far, far lower than your risk of serious outcomes with COVID-19. So the smart bet's on vaccination. It's just that simple. And as we mentioned previously, your immunity likely isn't going to be great with a mild infection, so you'd probably still end up at risk for reinfection and the potential related health issues, including long-term health problems.
There you go, Dr. Aaron Carroll, COVID Natural Immunity versus Vaccine Immunity. Search and subscribe to Healthcare Triage on YouTube. And while you're there, subscribe to youtube.com/standupwithpete. All right, I'm running out of time to get to the news dump and get this posted by 7 a.m., which is my goal because I am doing a rare morning producing job of the podcast. So let's get to that news dump. Here's today's jingle from Pete Coe.
Aggressive deer in mating season, neighborhood in a huff. The family dog is injured for today's news dump.
Oh, dear. Yeah, that is, there's actually video of that showing a deer attacking a family's pet dog. The dog is okay, though. Wow. Crazy. Thank you very much, Pico, for digging up that very rare deer attacks dog story. All right, what else do I have for you? Let's start with an appeals court in California that has banned large-capacity magazines. Like I said earlier about the shooting in Michigan, at the state level, there are laws being made all the time. The question certainly is obviously what happens at the Supreme Court, but super important to get those laws done at the state level. Earlier, I mentioned the issue between Congresswoman Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene against their Republicans, against Democrat Ilhan Omar. Well, I should probably mention there's also a real dramatic fight brewing in the Republican caucus between white women there as well. Nancy Mace versus Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Kevin McCarthy has no idea what to do and seemingly no control over these women. And it's pretty ugly. But I mention that story because it's in addition to the others happening right now with women in Congress. The Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has ordered all National Guard and Reserve troops to get COVID-19 vaccine or face a loss of pay. Dr. Oz of TV doctor fame has announced that he is launching a Senate bid. He's going to run as a Republican in Pennsylvania. And the backlash was vociferous and immediate because dude doesn't live there. Yeah, dude lives in New Jersey. So good luck with that, Dr. Oz. Other people saying, oh, I didn't even know he was a Republican. Yeah, you did. Just maybe you weren't paying attention. The movie Red Notice, starring Ryan Reynolds, Gal Gadot, and The Rock, Dwayne The Rock Johnson, has shattered Netflix records in 18 days. Apparently, like half of subscribers, including this one, have seen that movie, which is a pretty fascinating detail to report to you. I don't know. Was it good? Do you like those types of action films. Do you like The Rock? I certainly like that Ryan Reynolds and Gal Gadot. It was great. I like all three of them. I'm not going to lie to you. I like that movie. I was entertained by that movie. Sorry for doing an ad for Netflix. A lot of important trials, high-profile trials going on, I should say. There's always a lot of important trials that you don't hear about, but several high-profile ones. Josh Duggar is on trial. Elizabeth Holmes is on trial. Jussie Smollett is on trial, and so is Ghislaine Maxwell, if you're following any of those. Well, at least one somewhat important person is saying that the new variant is unlikely to cause severe cases. The founder of BioNTech is saying, Ugur Sahin is saying, vaccinated people should have protection against new variant. I don't know how much worth you should put into this guy, but I'll take it. Right now, I'll take anything. So I thought I'd give it to you. Could turn out to be wrong, of course. Don't wait. Get your boost now. China has announced that 85% of its citizens will use the Mandarin dialect of Chinese by 2025. So that's pretty important. What percentage of human beings then will be speaking Mandarin? Should we all learn it? I think it's too late for me, right? All right, well, we broke records with hurricanes again. Congratulations, planet. The 2021 Atlantic hurricane season ended on Tuesday after 21 named storms, continuing a record-breaking pattern from 2020, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. This was the seventh year in a row that a named storm formed before the official start of the season on June 1st as well. The increase in activity in the past 2 years can be attributed to higher than normal sea surface temperatures in the tropical Atlantic Ocean and Caribbean Sea. And although most of the storms stayed out in the open ocean this past year, it still proved to be more costly this past year than the year before. Total losses due to property and infrastructure damage this year have totaled about $105 billion, eclipsing the $102 billion in 2020. Hurricane Ida, of course, which made landfall in Louisiana in late August, tracked all the way up here to New York before exiting the Atlantic Ocean, was responsible for about $60 billion in damage alone. And of course, climate change is making these worse and more frequent. And finally, Chris Cuomo has been suspended indefinitely by CNN, and apparently there's a lot of issue behind the scenes there. The headline at Mediaite is that Jake Tapper and other CNN talent were reportedly infuriated at network over Chris Cuomo. Anderson Cooper taking over for him for the moment. Will they just give that hour to Laura Coates? Just give it to Laura Coates. This is ridiculous. The question now is my former employer, some of you still subscribing, I'm sure, to SiriusXM, how will they handle Chris Cuomo? Is he still on the air over there on the POTUS channel? And finally, and I know I already said finally, but one more because it's fun. The country of Barbados has stripped the Queen Elizabeth, of their head of state and their nominal ceremonial head of state, and now they're honoring Rihanna as a national hero. So an interesting ceremony, and Prince Charles was there. So this is not a contentious issue. Of course, they were blessing Barbados with their freedom, I guess. I don't know. I didn't read much about this. I just thought it was interesting and important, certainly to folks in Barbados. But they officially became a parliamentary republic on Monday night, severing ties with the Queen and declaring Rihanna as the island's national hero. Okay, makes sense. Well, that's all I've got for you on today's news dump, and I'm very excited to share both of my guest interviews with you today. Coming up, Dr. Priyanka Wali, who is the co-host of the Hypochondriactor podcast with Will and Grace's Sean Hayes. Dr. Priyanka Wali joins me for the first time. We talked about her career. She gave me medical advice. We talked about the podcast. Great conversation. Before that, I've got my conversation with the host of the Fake the Nation podcast, a TED fellow, an author, a stand-up comedian. My old friend Nadine Farsad joins me. But I do want to just remind you, yesterday was Giving Tuesday, and I hope that you considered giving to GiveWell, because GiveWell.org is an organization I have vetted, I have worked with, I have interviewed the CEO, I have interviewed the guy who was the psychological inspiration, Peter Singer, about effective altruism, which is what this nonprofit practices. GiveWell.org does more to help people living in poverty with evidence-backed, high-impact charities. than almost any other nonprofit, and I work with a whole bunch of them. And for Giving Tuesday, I'd really love for you to consider to give to GiveWell, givewell.org. I'm sure you get inundated with emails and requests for donations, and I'm just another guy doing that. But I love this organization, and if you've never donated to GiveWell's recommended charities before, you can have your donation matched up to $250 right now before the end of the year, as long as matching funds last. I'm going to keep plugging GiveWell, so please give well. GiveWell.org/standup right now. GiveWell.org/standup right now, and make sure they know you heard about us here and have your donation matched up to $250. All right. Well, now it's time to get to my first guest. She is, as I just mentioned, an old friend of mine, a comedian, an author, a TED Fellow, and the host of the Fake the Nation podcast, a Muslim American woman who I have known and loved for a long time. Really great to catch up with my friend Negin Farsad. And that is also her Twitter handle, NEGIN FARSAD, at Negin Farsad. Here we go. Negin Farsad joins me now. And, you know, this book of yours sits in my, I see it and look at it because it's up on a bookcase where I pass it and see it all the time. How to Make White People Laugh. You wrote this a few years ago. It holds up.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I'm so flattered that it is in your possession. Wow.
Yeah, it's very exciting that you wrote that book, and it's certainly very relevant. So thank you for joining me. How are you?
I'm good. I'm just I'm re-entering. When is this releasing, today or tomorrow?
Yeah, tomorrow probably, yeah.
Okay, so that'll be the Wednesday after Thanksgiving, and I'm still just re-entering society from Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
And so I have that, awkward re-entry feeling.
I had that yesterday. I said, is anybody else having a really difficult time getting their Monday or their week started? Because you really do some kind of emotional disconnect or relaxation or something along with everybody changes during that Thanksgiving week. And it's this, even the time between now and Christmas seems
dumb. Oh my God. I was on your show. This is something I quote from you all the time, which is that I think you referred to the time between Christmas and New Year's the taint.
Yes. The taint week.
The taint week.
Yes.
I actually feel like it's between Thanksgiving and New Year's. It's all taint.
Somebody said that to me yesterday. You should extend Taint Week to begin from Thanksgiving. Yeah,
I agree with that.
Lame duck of the year. It's nothing matter. How are we describing it? What is the taint of this? What does it mean, though?
Well, when we first logged onto this phone call, I said I'm done with this year, though it continues. And I think that's the psychological feeling you have to have in order to designate something a taint period, is that though it continues, you're just done with it emotionally. And though it continues, there's still work product to be delivered, the quality of which is questionable. You know what I mean? That's the other thing about taint weeks.
I love everything that you're saying. And it almost makes me wonder if you can apply it. I don't want to overuse it, right?
Sure,
because it seems like it should be this holiday thing. But can we apply it to an actual conversation, a Zoom meeting, a work meeting? All right, I think we've reached the taint.
Yes!
This is ridiculous. We're just being repetitive. I don't want to be here anymore. We have reached the taint. Let's wrap it up.
There's too many forms of goodbye happening. There's too many forms of we'll follow up on this issue happening. You know what I mean?
Action steps that we need to take, or even though a family visit. All right, we've reached the taint. Let's get out of here.
Yeah, I think and I also think that taint should be an official word in professional use. I want to see HR professionals using the word taint to describe what's happening in a meeting, and then it should be abruptly ended. I would just like an entire social shift around the use of this word. And
Mike in accounting submitted a motion for taint, and then it was seconded, and so we wrapped it up.
It's exactly how I want to see it used. No, and there's no even further explanation. Mike in accounting submitted a motion for taint. It's been seconded, and then it goes end meeting. Like no one says another word. It's just over.
I think we're definitely on to something, and let's just keep talking about it and growing it. But I want to talk to Nadine Farsad a little bit about Nadine Farsad.
Oh, God.
You wrote this book that I mentioned at the top, which is kind of a memoir of sorts about, growing up and going to college and basically your coming of age and how you transformed into kind of a social justice person, a feminist, a comedian. And you've had really impressive career using all of your skills in so many different ways. But tell me a little bit about little Negin Farsad, your first generation.
Yeah, my parents immigrated before I was born, and with my brother. So my brother and my parents are all immigrants. And then I got to just be like the full American one. I mean, full American one, whatever that means.
Well, are you jealous that is it better to be born American, or do you wish you were like your brother, an actual immigrant? What gives you more credibility? Or, I mean, there's pros and cons, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, one of the cons is like I'm trilingual because of the part of Iran that my parents are from. People speak Farsi and a dialect of Turkish. So I grew up with those two languages, but I am functionally illiterate. Like it would take me hours to read a paragraph. And my brother doesn't have that because he learned some reading and writing when he was little, and he didn't move until he was like 8 or something. So he had some stuff under his belt. He had for me to like learn that level of reading and writing would just be really painful. And it's on my to-do list. I mean to do it all the time. You know how useful it is for everyone to learn how to read and write Farsi. And
well, they say, I don't mean to jump in and tell you how to learn Farsi, but I do know that a lot of linguists suggest that the taint period is a good time to learn another language.
Right, because there's nothing happening there anyways. That's true of a psychological or fruitful business value. So there's that. I'm jealous. So I'm jealous of the fact that my brother got to experience some sort of like extended family life in Iran. That's something I didn't experience. Growing up, we didn't have any family here. We just had people that would come visit us. And sometimes they would stay for months. And so I did experience like a lot of family and grew to know them really, really well. But it wasn't the same thing as just like hopping down, the block to see like dozens of people you're related to. I've never had that experience, and I am sort of jealous of that. And that's just like the thing that globalization has given people. It's a lot of these broken families who speak to each other across continents and feel sad that they can't just see each other all the time either because it's too expensive or because just the political climate. I mean, I can't go to Iran comfortably. Like I can go comfortably, like on a plane, but it's unclear. I've said a lot of things publicly. Like who knows what I'm going to say on your show today, Pete? You know what I mean? I've said enough things publicly that it's not necessary. It's just not safe. I've been a comedian for too long and a woman, an Iranian American all at the same time. So who knows what the government thinks about people like me?
I don't know that, if you said anything on this podcast that you get in trouble. But I do know I have a new subscriber, and it just so happened when I booked you, I got a new Patreon subscriber who goes by Republican Guard 147. So maybe they are listening. I don't know. As a result,
that might be. That's
whatever
that's
it
them.
takes.
That's
whatever
them.
it takes to get new subscribers.
Jamshid, is that you?
So you grew up though in Palm Springs.
Yeah, I grew up in Palm Springs, California.
We're around the same age, I think. And so you grew up in the 80s and 90s. It was a great time to grow up in California, I'm guessing, in that area. Was your childhood safe and secure?
Yeah, it's funny because I was just remembering fire season in Palm Springs, and fire season in Palm Springs was just a thing that you would see in the distance on a mountain. You would see a little fire and you'd be like, oh my gosh, that's a fire. And then if like a day later would be done, and it wasn't all over the state, it felt very like just my area. And so fire season has blossomed into its own since I was a kid. But Palm Springs is just a really interesting, and I didn't know, it's a great place to raise kids. There it is. It was safe. Again, it was the 80s and 90s, so I did a lot of stuff by myself that kids don't do anymore. And I grew up in a neighborhood of senior citizens, and so there wasn't any danger, even if I could try and rustle some up. It's like Estelle down the block was mostly going about her day using her walker and not getting up to shenanigans the way I wish she would.
That's right. You grew up right down the street from Estelle Getty.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Specifically.
So what about your ethnic background in terms of, did your parents, I don't know what Persian immigrants thought. I feel like I've talked to Maz Jabrani about this, but were they like, embrace your ethnicity, learn the language, love the culture, or was it more, no, speak English, assimilate to American, or was that our parents' generation more likely?
My parents, they didn't have to give me a huge speech about it because they did this thing early on, and I don't remember it. I must have been in preschool or whatever, where I came home and tried to speak to them in English, and they were like, we don't understand. You have to say it in Farsi because we don't understand. And because they did that, it got a thing in my head of like, oh, unless I speak to these people in Farsi, like they're like never going to understand me. So as a result, I was really strict with myself about speaking Farsi to them all the time. So and also just, I think because all of our family was in Iran and we would summer in Tehran, the way P. Diddy has done as well with his saffron parties. Well, we would summer in Tehran. So I felt very strongly about my family there and about what it meant to be Iranian, even though it was, I think, subconscious as a child.
What was summer in Tehran like? What were those activities? Was that fun? Was it like the whole summer? Was it just a month? Who was there? What did you?
Yeah,
I want everything
I think we were there like a month or 6 weeks or something. Because it's like with Iranians, like they don't travel to Iran just for like a week. Like
sure,
if you go, you just really do it up.
Yeah, my wife did that growing up in Sicily. She would go to Sicily where her mom is from. So it sounds similar. Yeah,
and. One of my earliest memories, first of all, my memories of Iran are just nothing but utter fondness. It was really fun. They know how to party, despite it being technically illegal. And it was all just fun. But I will say one of my earliest memories is looking out the window one morning, and it was Ramadan. And there were these people, what is it called?
I don't know.
Hitting themselves. Oh, my God. What is the word?
Oh, right.
Oh my God, I'm blanking on this term. Yeah, self-flagellation. So they were like self-flagellating, and I remember, and I asked my aunt, like, "Hey, what's going on?" Because it wasn't like cute, you know what I mean? It looked a little painful. And I was a little scared, and I asked I was like 6 or 7, and I asked my aunt what's going on, and she said, oh yeah, that's self-flagellation. They do it, because they're very serious, a specific type of very serious Muslim. And I was like, do I have to do that? And she was like, no, you're good. Let's go eat some chocolate. And so that's basically how Islam was handled with me, and there was a lot of chocolate involved, and various types of Iranian sweets.
Were your parents religious? Were you raised religious? Were you more religious influenced when you were in Tehran for those summers? What role did religion play?
Look, I have one side of my family was pretty serious practicing, so I was around, the prayer rug and all of that. And I honestly, I'm a little jealous of, or like, I'm a little regretful that no one sat me down and was like, hey, you can do this prayer 5 times a day or as many times as you want. And it's like a meditative practice. And because there's something about it, because it is straight up like it is meditation. So now I'm like downloading the Headspace app to try and get the same thing that my grandparents just had naturally doing this prayer. You know what I mean?
Right. Sure. Yeah.
So, and also, hey, they kept in good squatting condition, their whole lives doing the prayer. There's a physical element to it. There's a yoga-esque move. And, and I think people sort of people look at that prayer as being like somehow really intensely dangerous, or, like, oh, if you see that prayer happening, it's violent. But that to me it's very peaceful. I have like very peaceful associations with it because I saw a family doing it. And it was just this moment of quiet. It was just a couple minutes of quiet, and it looked quite beautiful from where I stood as a kid.
Since we brought up religion, and your religion is Islam, I'm told it sounds like, based on what you're saying, and and what I've read.
You're
and seen
really good at deducing
in your TED Talk. So I wanted to just ask you about one current situation, which is this horrible woman, Lauren Boebert, Colorado Congresswoman, and what she said. Are you familiar with all this whole drama with Ilhan Omar and what she said about that?
Please, fill me in.
Oh, you don't know about this?
I mean, I don't know, like, is there something recent?
Well, she said over Thanksgiving during the tank.
Oh, yeah. Then I don't know, because like I said, I'm just reintegrating into society.
No problem. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to get your actual reaction to it.
Yeah,
I almost want to just play the comment. Hold on. Let me just play it for you.
Let's hear it.
And while I'm setting it up here, I actually think I can just get you maybe talking about what happened around 9/11, because Dana Milbank reacted to this today. In today's Washington Post, Dana Milbank wrote a piece about how while George W. Bush ended up bombing Muslim countries and so on, he went way out of his way to make speeches at mosques, et cetera, to say Islam is not our enemy. The Muslim people are not our enemy. And of course, national security experts, would advise all leaders to not to do that, because you don't want to give them an argument, the extremists. And so, but he always did that. But now today, with comments like the one I'm about to play for you, like, that's just so far out the door. And I just wonder if you have thoughts about how far we've come from the Republicans during the Bush administration, the way they at least talked about Islam and Muslims, to where we are at now. Do you want to say anything about that while I'm setting this up?
I do. It's funny to think that, to look back on George W. Bush and think that he handled things, certain aspects of his presidency, quite responsibly. But I do think that the compassionate conservatism mantra did bleed into this kind of rhetoric around Islam and showing up at a mosque after 9/11 and doing all that stuff. I feel like we obviously had an uptick in Islamophobia, but he wasn't trying to exacerbate it, right? He was like, oh, and now it's my job to try and bring down the temperature. And I feel like he did, for all of the terrible, terrible things that he did in that presidency. One thing he also did domestically was like to calm everybody down. I wonder, Islamophobia was already bad. I wonder how much worse it would have gotten if he didn't take that tactic.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Hard to prove a negative, but yeah, nonetheless, a good point. All right, here she is. This is Lauren Boebert, Colorado Congresswoman, who, by the way, just so you know, because you're late to this, if you weren't paying attention, this scenario she describes, Negin, didn't happen. She has admitted it didn't occur. This encounter didn't occur. This was her literally doing something very similar to what you and I have been doing our whole careers, stand-up comedy. She's up there with a microphone. It's a minute 15. I'll play it for you and get your reaction. Here we go.
And I see a Capitol police officer running hurriedly to the elevator. I see fret all over his face, and he's reaching. And I'm like, what? The door's shutting. Like, I can't open it. Like, what's happening? I look to my left, and there she is, Ilhan Omar. And I said, well, she doesn't have a backpack. We should be fine.
Okay.
It's so interesting because this is the problem with conservative comedy, that I don't know that they know how to do comedy. There are some problems with conservative comedy. There are moments where I've heard jokes that actually feel funny to me, where they're like self-deprecating in an interesting way. I was reading about some jokes out of like a really prominent evangelical like newspaper that thinks of itself as The Onion, and I can't remember what it's called, which makes me a really great guest right now. But I remember thinking, they're like making fun of a megachurch in a loving way that it both indicates that they go to mega churches and can see the humor of some of the things that happen with mega churches. It has to do with, they made a joke about like a fog machine, like, I was trying to look for God, for Jesus, but I couldn't see him through the fog machine, I think was the joke. And I was like, that's funny. You know what I mean? That's cute. It's like a comment on the church and the experience. It's like, but at the same time, lovingly mocking, right? The problem with this kind of thing is that it's not lovingly mocking. It's just preying on stereotypes about Muslims being violent and wanting to bomb people, right? There's no, I only talk about Muslims bombing people out of love for them. Like, that's not how that joke works, right? And so I think it's just, the other thing is like, I know that like deep down, people who are laughing at that joke know that it's hack and that it's not all that interesting and it's not original. And it's like that joke could have happened in 2002. Like, move on from that joke, like just from a joke level, because it seemed like she was out there to entertaining. And so that's like the comedy aspect of it that I think like, that I think, they should look at. But also it's just, I'm so saddened that we've gotten to a place where we want from our politicians to have these like, snarky quips. I don't like that. I want politicians to be august and smart and wise and sage and, I want to feel like, they could easily do, James Earl Jones voiceovers, and they could, and the female version of that, the Helen Mirren voiceovers, right? Like I want, that's what I want, like from politicians. And we've gotten to this place where they eat and by the way, both sides, like, because there are Democratic politicians who also stoop to making personal attacks like this. And I just don't think it helps anyone. And why would she even make that up? Like, what is the point? I don't know. What were your thoughts?
I was sad by it. Like, I didn't even get to the examination of the joke the way that you did, which is interesting because I was so sad that a congresswoman made that comment, period, because of what I said earlier about how, in terms of George W. Bush and how far we have come. I mean, it's just so cheap and dehumanizing. And it's also, the worst thing about that, of course, is that encounter that she describes didn't even happen. So the whole thing. So
later on, she came out and said, I made that up.
Yeah, she basically tried to apologize. She was forced to kind of walk it back to some extent. And then she called Congresswoman Ilhan Omar apparently to kind of apologize, and then ended up demanding that Ilhan Omar actually apologized for comments that she'd made in the past. And it was just, it's nonsensical gossip kind of to get more attention and media scenario. But it's just, we've fallen so far. And those kind of comments and jokes made in a comedy club or even in a schoolyard. What's a schoolyard? A setting is, or even in a workplace, like they're probably never really appropriate outside of comedy. But regardless, that was such a stupid joke. But it seems so wildly inappropriate for a grown adult congressperson to say such a thing.
Can I say something? I you know that I made a movie with our esteemed friend Dino Bidala called The Muslims Are Coming. And what we did was we rounded up a bunch of Muslim American comedians in a nonviolent way. And we took them on tour and we did these shows and we called the tour The Muslims Are Coming. And then we got some famous people like Jon Stewart and Louis Black or whoever to then comment, wax hilarious about Islamophobia. It was a wonderful time. And since then, I have consistently performed in red states when I can. And, you know, like right after the election of Donald Trump, I was performing in South Carolina and in Wyoming and in South Dakota. And here's the thing that I've learned is that it's so easy to make a snarky comment and then to get a snarky comment. It's easy to rile up the assholes of America, because we all have it in us to be dicks. But if you approach people with love, you will get love in return. And I say that as someone who has gotten my fair share of death threats, and I've gotten the hate mail, and I've got all of that. But when I am in the field with people who really don't like that there are Muslims here or xenophobic or just straight up racist, they have a really hard time greeting my love with crappy behavior. They have a hard time doing it. So I hate to be like everyone rise above, like it sounds so corny or whatever, but like if we all rose above, it would make her remarks just seem so otherworldly and and outside the bounds, you know. But because no one's really rising above, it kind of keeps giving. And I understand, like, I'm not saying Ilhan Omar has done, I don't know specifically what she said or hasn't said or whatever. I don't want to get into it, but I know that, like, you know, I've seen, like, for example, AOC has made some tweets that are like snarky. They're not like kind. You know what I mean? And I understand. I just think if we stop doing that, all of us, then it would really deflate the meanness that's coming.
Well, that's never going to happen.
I don't know. I mean, I'd like to believe that it is.
You prosper. The more snarky, the more mean, the more outrageous you are. You stand to gain in every way.
Okay.
Outside of you know what we would define as integrity.
I want you to think, who is the most famous woman in the world? American woman.
Michelle Obama.
Okay, another one, close, but that's a good one.
Currently, the most famous living.
Yeah.
The Queen of England.
No, okay. I was driving at Oprah.
Okay, fine. She's one of them. She's top 5.
And Michelle Obama's a good one too. Do these women trade on snarkiness, or do they trade on like actual, unquestionable goodness? Right. You know what I mean?
There are a number of ways to get attention and become successful. And there is, as you're referring to, generally speaking, with I think Oprah and Obama, Michelle Obama, people would say they take the high road. They're mature women who are, by the way, the subject of horrible rhetoric and probably violent threats on a very regular basis, and yet they always take the high road. But you're saying we should appeal to our, what is it, better angels or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, sure, you can. I think you've done that. I think I've, to the most extent, done that and maintained our integrity and not screamed and yelled and been divisive just to get clicks and ratings and subscribers. But if you look at the top people in media and politics, the ones who are the most popular, that's how they're doing it. And in our game as well, from Joe Rogan to Lauren Boebert to, whoever you want to say. I
also want to point out that Lauren Boebert did not respect the taint period of the year. Basically, don't break any dumb news during the taint period.
That should be a new, for sure. Well, because you're really supposed to, what you're saying, I think what we're saying is that during this period, we're really supposed to be unproductive and not make a lot of progress or cause any problems.
Yeah, look, and I'm saying that as a person who celebrates a fun Muslim Christmas, which is like regular Christmas but without any of the religion. Right?
I think we do that.
I totally agree. Unproductive, like hang out, be with your family, be with your friends. Like think about writing Christmas cards and I don't know, just catching up on The Crown or whatever.
Let me go back now. I could add so many follow-ups to that. And I could talk about this idea that we're birthing for the rest of the time. But I do want to get back to some of the meat of your life and of your career and of your book. And we've talked a little bit about religion and ethnicity, but I do, you talk about your own coming of age at Cornell University. You must have been a super smart student in high school to get into Cornell as one of the top schools in the country. Why did you go there? What did you want to be when you grow up?
Oh my God, because growing up in Palm Springs, I just thought, this is the armpit of America. I have to get out of here. Real life happens in the Northeast. Like I was just convinced that that's where smart people were and real people were. And I now know that Palm Springs, California is far from the armpit of America. But at the time I was just desperate. I was desperate to go to an Ivy League school. And I arranged everything academically in order to do that. I was such an overachiever and a really a worker bee. And so I managed to get into that school. And wait, sorry, what was your question?
Why did you want, that's all interesting what you just said, why you wanted to go there, but did you have a goal, a career in mind
I was going to be, I wanted to be president of the United States. I really thought, and I think the other funny thing is that I remember watching, there was a show that I watched and I was like far too young for it. It was called 30 something.
Yeah, I remember it.
Oh, you remember that show? Okay. And I remember there was like some maybe storyline about a woman not being able to do something or whatever. And I remember thinking, oh my God, that's so dumb. They don't have like equality worked out. By the time I'm 20, they'll have equality worked out. And I just truly thought that there was, misogyny, all that stuff was just going to be such a boring thing from the past. We would never have to deal with it by the time I was like 20. And I grew up just feeling none of those boundaries, none of those hurdles. I didn't see any obstacles. And so I really thought like, I'm going to go to college and I'm going to go to grad school and I'm going to be president of the United States. That's just how it works. And I felt that way since I was like 11, but I started doing comedy. I started doing theater and stuff in high school. And then I did it in college. I was in a sketch comedy troupe in college and I was really bitten severely by the comedy bug. And I went to grad school at Columbia. And I got a dual master's in African-American studies and public policy. And I was on track, right? Like I interned for Hillary Clinton. I interned for Charlie Rangel, some of these, icons of the Democratic Party. And I became a policy advisor for the city of New York. And I was really like serious. I was I was in a career track position, but I was doing comedy on the side the entire time. And it really overtook the other stuff.
Do you have any regrets at all about any of that and the direction that you took?
I think that it's not over. I think I am really engaged in my community. I live in New York City and I care so much about New York City. And I feel like it's, who knows what's going to happen for me. I'm more qualified than some people to go into public policy and to be an elected official. Even though I've been a comedian these many years.
I love all of that. It's a fascinating, I just can't imagine what it was like to be a student at an Ivy League school, much less two. And in your book, you talk about kind of where you learned about whiteness and white people and race and on campus at Cornell, given the fraternities and all of that. Can you talk a little bit about kind of when you went to Cornell and how you felt?
Yeah, the high school I went to in Palm Springs was maybe like, I'm making this up, but it felt like maybe 50 or 60% Mexican American. We had a really large Mexican American population, and I didn't realize that was unusual. I didn't realize that the level of diversity that I experienced on a daily basis was not like this as it was everywhere in America. And I go to Cornell, and it's just like more white people than I had ever seen, white people as far as the eye could see. And it was like, oh, that's interesting. Where are all the Mexican Americans, And there was a small group of them. And again, it also had to do with like the regional stuff. Obviously, the Southwestern United States has a different demographic makeup. And I just everything about like the Northeast just felt like it was the movies, like these, 2-story houses and trees. I mean, Pete, trees? Have you seen these things? No, but seriously, like I grew up in the desert. I didn't experience weather. Like everything was very, very different for me going to college. And I remember that, fraternity parties and sorority parties were really clearly racially designated. And from a very, very early on my freshman year, I realized that like, oh, like these parties are not for me, and I'm not particularly welcome, which is how it became quickly clear to me that I need to cast my lot with the theater dorks because they had fewer kind of like racial politics. And they took anybody. Like there was a very low bar. Right. So yeah, I think. And then there was so then the other weird thing about Cornell at the time was that people could choose where they wanted to live. They would rank like, I want to live in this dorm, that dorm. And because of the generational nature of how some of these Ivy League schools work, where like you are a legacy, your parents went to Cornell and you go to Cornell. People would be like, oh, go live in this particular dorm. That's where I lived, right? In the 60s or 70s. And so the dorm system had become extremely racially segregated. And we had none other than Al Sharpton come and march with us to desegregate these dorms. I mean, I can't believe that this is something that happened so late into the 90s and 2000s that Cornell was dealing with this, but it was, and that's kind of where I had a little bit of a racial awakening to how the rest of the country deals with race, and I got to do it on that campus, and I got to do it like walking, behind Al Sharpton.
That's wild.
I know, isn't that crazy? I didn't even, didn't know about him until that.
Do you ever stop? I mean, given your entire life and who you are and what you've written about, what you've talked about, we've discussed some of it already, but basically you've been an anti-racist, an anti-sexist or feminist most of your life. You've understood what all of that meant. You write a lot about it. You've talked a lot about it.
Yeah.
And I just wonder how you think or see where we are at in today's America, much less the larger world, with those issues in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity, because given that white parents in almost every community in the country are screaming about what is being taught to their kids in school and very concerned about their white kids feeling badly and feeling ashamed of their whiteness. And then, given the movement, I would argue in terms of equality with gender, certainly there's huge strides, but with women's reproductive rights, not to mention other issues regarding sexism, the Me Too movement, whatever, and maybe, people's thoughts on where we're at. How do you look at where we're at with these issues today? Because I was naive and I just thought we were, making a lot more progress, but it seems like we've taken a large step back from the direction you and I we're headed in our lives and in this world.
I mean, I'm a little bit more hopeful than that. I think that there's like cycles that happen, and then it just sort of, and I think every time we come out of a little race backlash cycle, we're a little further ahead. So I don't think the leaps, it's not like clear. It is, it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back, and 2 steps forward and 1 step back, right? That's kind of how I see it. And the reason I say that is because, I remember in the 90s, the big issue at school was quotas and college admissions and affirmative action, right? And people talked about that constantly. And look, I'm talking to you as like just one of these, super liberal types right now. But when I was in high school, I thought affirmative action meant that I wasn't going to get into college because Iranian Americans are probably still like represented in a lot of elite schools. We're not like, they're like a really tiger parent demographic that like there's a lot of pressure on us to do well from our parents, and as a result, there are a lot that do and go to like these excellent schools. And so it's like you don't have, and we're such a small percentage of the population, it's like you don't have a problem finding Iranian applicants to elite schools.
Right,
okay.
right.
So I thought just the mere fact of me being Iranian and I was mad about affirmative action. I was mad about like quota or whatever. And I have come around to having a completely different feeling about that. But I feel like this stuff with critical race theory is just it's just like another version of that thing that we had in the 90s where everyone was really mad about it. And it's also, the Rodney King beating in the 90s. I mean, we're seeing a lot of these cycles kind of like happen again. And the question is like, where do we land when we come out of it? And I do think, however you slice it, we still are going to come out better because we didn't have, like, culturally speaking, there were 0 brown people that like me on television when I was growing up. There was, like we had black shows, but we didn't have kind of any other member ethnic groups represented. We didn't have a black president in our past. We didn't have a bunch of, women firsts, a female vice president and all this stuff. Like, I think we are, and Obama says this a lot, right? He's like, things are better. You have to accept that it's like, statistically, they're better. So when we do come out of this, I still think we are ahead. It's not like totally linear.
I love that answer. And I want to see it the way that you're seeing it. And I hope that you're right. I just...
Right, on my podcast, Fake the Nation, plug for the pod, which Pete Dominick is a regular on. He's so fantastic. We, one of our mottos that we got T-shirts made of this was we're only doing optimism, because I actually don't think it helps anyone. I don't think it helps us to look at things any other way.
I actually have always agreed with that, but people are beating down my worldview, which I think is similar to yours, so much that it has started to make me question it. And I guess specifically, it's like if you have a more fatalist, or they would maybe argue realistic worldview, that things aren't going to work out. Some people would argue you're less disappointed, you're less surprised, you're more prepared because your worldview is more accurate. It's more
you're
realistic.
Also just more miserable, no?
I agree with that. Listen, you and I can't, even if they could get me to believe in a different worldview or have a different attitude, I don't want to be scared and miserable and depressed. And I am at times in my life, certainly after I lost my job or big giant scenarios that are, personal in my family or even in the world occur. Yeah, I feel all of those negative feelings, but I do try not to every day when I wake up. So, and I think I do a pretty good job at it, but
I think, part of that too is that, like, we both have kids, and sometimes I stop and think, how are you going to explain climate change to your kid? And she's 2.5, so I'm not having to have those conversations yet. But when I do, I can't picture myself couching it in a whole bunch of negativity. Like, hey, little girl, your world is doomed. It's going to be scorched earth. You probably won't have any kids because there won't be a world to have them in, and let's see you later. You know what I mean? Like, I can't imagine. That's not an option. That's just not an option for how to explain the world's issues and her part in it. To me, it's like solution. And it's like, I don't know. I also think, I also don't love, like, you know, the part of being in social justice that's so, like, sanctimonious. I also don't want to be you know, I want this process of, like, saving the planet and saving democracy and, like, you know, all that stuff to be fun, because civic engagement is fun, because it, like, is fulfilling, because it's great, you know, because it's better to work with your neighbors than against them. And I don't know, and for example, of things that I see regularly that I get really excited about. So I'm a part of the TED Fellows. And TED, the TED organization, like, has this fellowship program, and people apply, and it's just, like, very prestigious, like, scientists and entrepreneurs and whatever. I happen to be one, but it's weird because I'm a comedian. It doesn't make sense. However, I know, like, an unusual number of scientists, and I also know an unusual number of female scientists, and I'm now seeing a lot of technology coming out from these female scientists. And this is our generation that, like, went to college. It was like after that first wave of feminism and that second wave of feminism, and where it was like, okay, a whole bunch of ladies are going to start doing this. What are they going to do now that they're in the field? And I see what they're doing. They're creating ways. They're literally discovering how it is that ovaries work. Stuff that nobody cared about because men were in charge of science. And now we have women figuring it out. I know a woman who is literally growing baby corals so she can replenish coral reefs. Shout out Kristen Marhaven. You know, I just see so much science happening because women are taking the charge. That is, like, truly stuff that's, like, changing the game, and it's so uplifting. So I feel like maybe that's a way to get uplifted, is, like, go to like, you know, a scientific magazine and read about new discoveries and new inventions.
Well, you said, I mean, I love what you're saying. I mean, I think reeling back a little bit, the idea that your pursuit in life is to be optimistic and to be positive and to find people and places and things that uplift you is, I think you might take that for granted. Like that is your, you know, that's how you operate. You wake up and you look for that. I am really happy to hear that, because I also feel like I share that idea. And I think what you said about civic engagement and working with your neighbors in your community, or, you know, people in your school, or anything to do with your kids, is a great way to feel purpose driven. And I sometimes wonder if I were ever to get old and retire from doing the things I love doing. You see people sitting around. I'm like, that's where I would really be volunteering, probably.
Yeah.
Like
me too, because it also seems fun.
Well, it is when you're older and you can't go out and play recreational, you know, pickup games. You can't do all kinds of other things that you might have been able to do earlier for any number of reasons. How do you feel purpose-driven, fulfilled? And I think being engaged, whether it's volunteering or being paid, whatever, the things that you described, the activities that you described in your community is how to stay positive. It's a constant burst of positivity, even though sometimes things don't work. And you know, fail.
I during the I had a quite social pandemic, which I know is weird. But I had a quite social pandemic because I would go to this same coffee shop every day, and we all sat outside, right? Because no one was going indoors, and we would brave the cold just to have a coffee. And I kept seeing the same people, and you know, and I kind of became a part of this, like, posse of, like, 20 people that go to this coffee shop. And we're all on a shared, you know, text message chain. And, you know, when someone got a surgery, a bunch of people were there to drop off, like, groceries and this and that. And when someone, like, I think this is the thing about civic engagement, and my point about the coffee is that it doesn't have to be, and obviously I would love if you're like volunteering for one fair wage or whatever, major institution, but it doesn't have to be that. It could simply be that you're a better neighbor, that you notice when a neighbor needs your help, because I feel like, we talk a lot about, fringe identities flourishing because of the internet and people getting really like QAnon, stuff like that, flourishing. But the simple act of engaging with neighbors stops people from falling in the cracks that makes them then go towards those fringe identities. And so just being a better neighbor is a good first step of being, civically engaged.
How do you be a better neighbor to your next door neighbor who just hates you?
Look, I mean, there's a percentage of people that you're just never going to reach, right? Like that.
Okay.
And you
right.
shouldn't waste your time on those people. There's the a healthy, whatever it is, 20% of people who are skeptics. And those people with some sugar and spice can be lured into your ways. And I think those are the people to focus on.
Do you have a go-to move, gesture, comment, thing that you do to soften up somebody who might be, as you call them, skeptic? I feel like you're one of those people who has some kind of secret gift or gesture or something or other that you,
I don't know that I have a secret. Like having traveled around the country and having talked to so many skeptics, specifically about Muslims or immigrants. I just ask people what they're up to about their family. I tell them about mine. If you keep things micro, right? It's when we get into these like abstract political conversations that people start to not be able to come on board. But if I tell someone about my grandmother, can they come on board? Of course they can. Then they can also tell me about theirs. It's so obvious. It's funny because I think there used to be this the reputation of Americans around the world, and I wrote an op-ed about this in the Progressive magazine, so you could read it. But the reputation of Americans around the world is that we're nice. I lived in Paris for a while, not to brag to listeners, but I've lived in Paris, and I would always chat to strangers and to whoever, and I would always be, oh, how's it going? You know what I mean? And they're like, oh, you're so American. Americans are so nice and chatty. This is the reputation that Americans have around the world, that we're nice and chatty. We know how to do it. And it's not like we know how to do it from 100 years ago. We literally know how to do it from 10 years ago. We're the same people that we were 10 years ago. We know how to be nice to one another and chatty to one another. It's a part of the American DNA to do it. And so that, I think, when I go to a bodega, I'll tell you how annoying I am, but that also I think people love. There's studies that when you talk to people about the weather, their serotonin levels go up. There's studies about this. So whenever I'm at one of those self-service bodegas where you're doing your own coffee, and let's say there's a French roast, but there's also a hazelnut or something, and the person in front of me picks the hazelnut, and I just turn to them and I go, oh wow, so you're having a hazelnut day, huh? It's so dumb. This personal intervention.
That's not dumb. That is hilarious.
It's so dumb.
And that's the thing.
And then they turn to me and they kind of laugh and they go, oh my God, you know what? I am, and I don't normally get it. And then they're telling me a story about hazelnut coffee. You know what I'm saying? This happens all the time. I do know what you're saying, but what you're saying is something I think that I'm learning a lot about, maybe myself by talking to you, and kind of, it seems like we're very similar this way. So I want this compliment to be about you. It's easier for you to have the worldview you have, or a sunnier disposition, because you're so damn likable. You always have been. Get the fuck out of here. Thank you.
No, but I mean, I'm not, that. You're so, I was so excited to talk to you. I'm so excited to be on your podcast. You're a very attractive person to be around because you're just likable. You're easygoing. You're thoughtful. You're funny. You're empathic. And I think that it's not a criticism. It's just that, of course, you have that worldview. You're that likable. You're a happy person. So you're fun to be around. So life is better with with Nadine Farsad and in this moment, whether I'm getting coffee or she's on my podcast. That's how I feel. And I just don't think that a lot of people are that way, unfortunately.
Oh, it's all about, I was like totally a non-chatty, silent person until I was like 14.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, not at all chatty, very scared. And then I took a drama class. Okay, so that's what changed it. But there's ways to challenge yourself to just open up conversations with people. It just requires a little practice. And then when you break the seal enough times, it becomes so easy to do. And yeah. I promise it's a learned behavior. I promise.
I love having a hazelnut day, and I would love if there are more little things like that you do or say, you should publish them or share them, because they're great. Like I'm teaching my daughters some of the simple, nuanced communication devices in life like that. And I remember growing up, I must have been 13 or 14, a friend of mine who was even more socially likable and active than I was. And I was pretty, outgoing and extroverted at the time. I remember him just simply saying to an adult, "How are you?" I was like, "The fuck?" He just said, "How are you?"
Yeah.
And I lifted that right away and stole it. And I've been, thieving ideas like that my entire life. And I'm trying to share all of those with my daughters. I just wonder if you think that those are behaviors that you could still learn in your 40s and 50s, or if you're destined to be a grump or a curmudgeon if you haven't established those.
No, I think
type of
the point about the meeting this new coffee crew of people during the pandemic is I make this point very strongly because it is difficult to make friends as when you're the older you get.
Yes.
And I'm really impressed with myself that I made new friends. And I think it's and if anyone thinks that I don't have social anxiety, they are wrong. I am a normal human being that has feelings of social anxiety, because I would see these people meet up for coffee and I didn't know them, and why would they ever talk to me? And I had the sweaty palms and all of that stuff. And it is literally just about saying hello anyway. So it's just giving yourself that extra push to do a thing you don't want to do. And that's it. That's all it is.
I'm going to end it there because it's such a positive lesson, I think, that you're sharing with us. And I love it. And of all the things that I thought we might talk about, I didn't think that we would talk about this last subject of positivity and optimism, and I just love it. I don't think I've had a similar conversation on the podcast, so this was so great. Tell people why they should listen to your podcast. I mean, I plugged everything's in the show notes, but Fake the Nation with Negin Farsad is a great podcast, and since you're listening to one right now, you can go over and listen to Negin. What is it, and why should people listen? Well,
I think because news has become harrowing, and I take the harrowing out of news. That's, I think, the main reason. And we have just fun people on who are also really smart. That's the brew of the show. People like Pete, who can also can bring some knowledge, but also just bring some lightness. And we take the harrowing out of news.
Listen to this review, a recent review on your podcast at Apple Podcasts. I love this podcast. Negin is a delight. I do so much enjoy the broad spectrum of topics and wonderful guests. The podcast is informative and entertaining, although I don't think you should ever have Pete Dominic on again. What? Why did this person...
There we go. This is what we call a lie. You're doing what's her name?
Enough with the whites, it says. Enough with the whites? What the? I can't even. Now I'm a victim. All right, Negin.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun.
Wasn't it, though? How about it? Negin Farsad is her Twitter handle. Go let her know that you heard her on the podcast. Check out her podcast, Fake the Nation. Get her book. Watch her TED Talks. Watch her live doing stand-up. And again, thank her for joining me on today's program. All right, well, now it's time to get to my second guest of today's show. She joins me as well for the first time ever on the podcast, and we'd actually not met before, but I was pitched by an old friend to have her on the show. She looked really fascinating because she's both a doctor and a stand-up comedian. And she co-hosts a podcast with one of the most famous actors and podcast hosts, Sean Hayes, in the country. He is one of the three hosts of a very popular podcast called Smartless, and he also hosts this podcast, Hypochondriactor. Well, Dr. Priyanka Wali joins me for the first time today. Check her out at Wali Priyanka. That's her Twitter handle, at WALIPRIYANKA. And on each episode of her podcast with Sean Hayes, they welcome a celebrity guest to describe an incredible medical story. New episodes available every Wednesday wherever you listen to podcasts. Of course, Dr. Wali performs routinely all over the country as well, and I'm really excited to have her joining me for the first time ever. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Priyanka Wali. All right, Dr. Priyanka Wali joins me right now for the first time. I'm so excited to meet you, if even virtually. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me here, Pete. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah, you're a fascinating human being. I mean, you're both a doctor and a stand-up comedian, and you host a podcast with a super famous actor that we'll talk about that I've just mentioned here in the intro, Sean Hayes. I mean, are your parents disappointed or not?
Yeah, no, they're extremely not disappointed now. Although when I first started stand-up, they were not on board. They were not feeling it. I come from a family, my whole family is physicians, so this was very out of character. But now they're like my number one fans. They are totally, I mean, they are all about Team Priyanka now.
When did that change? Was there any agreement? Were you did you have to uphold any part of a deal? Did they say, like, you know, one of those, like, okay, first you practice, you get your degree, you practice medicine, then you can start doing stand up, and you can still come over for dinner. But I mean, was there a deal, a negotiation of any sort?
Yeah, so actually what happened is when I first started doing stand-up, they were like, they were not on board. So then I just kind of went into the background and disappeared and was doing stand-up on the DL. And you would see on Facebook, like, the shows that I would be on. And one of my cousins actually hit me up on Facebook and was like, Priyanka, my wife's having her 40th birthday party. I want you to MC this event. And I was like, I don't know, Sunju, like, no one is really supportive of me doing stand up. At that time I was like, I don't know if I can do a clean half hour. And he's like, I don't care, Priyanka. I believe in you. If anyone's going to MC this event, it's going to be you. So I prepped to MC this event, and the whole, like, everyone from the family was going to be there. And I remember talking to my brother about, I don't know if I can do this. He's like, this is your greatest test as an artist. How versatile can you be? You have to be able to do a family-friendly half-hour set. So I prepped for it. I did the event. I emceed, and it was a super hit. I made everyone laugh. It was clean. It was funny. And that evening, it was almost like a Hollywood moment. My dad came up to me after the event, and he was like, I was wrong, and you were awesome, and I'm sorry. And it was very healing.
Oh my God, did music start playing in the background? Like,
I mean, there was Indian music playing in the background because it was a Bollywood themed party. So yeah, it was beautiful. After that event, they were 100% on board. And now they're like my number one fans.
Tell me a little bit about your ethnic background, your parents, and growing up. And did you grow up in a Indian American community? You're first generation, right? Or are you?
Yeah. So I was born and raised in Southern California. I grew up here. My family's Kashmiri. We're actually Kashmiri Pundit. And if you know anything about the region of Kashmir, that area is a part of North India that's been wrecked by genocide and a lot of violence. So my family actually immigrated to the U.S. to basically start a new life here. And I was lucky enough to be born in the U.S. And yeah, Kashmiris, there's a lot of rich history in that region.
Well, I've known a lot of folks who are in a similar situation, first generation Indian Americans is what I mean. And But I don't know enough about the kind of diaspora, or is it diaspora?
Yeah, it's I call it diaspora.
Diaspora is how it's pronounced. I knew I pronounced it 2 wrong ways. Anyway, in terms of like, India's a giant country with several different religions. It's just multicultural. And so, like, what does it mean? Like, if you're Kashmiri and you're in America, are you hanging out with others from that region? How much does that differentiate? Or is it more of a religious or other differences? Like, how do you, within the diaspora, relate to folks, at least in, I mean, California, Indian American are everywhere, right? Houston.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I mean, being brown in the United States, I mean, growing up, we would hang around other Kashmiri families, but Gujaratis, Punjabis, South Indians, I mean, you name it. I guess there's still the identity of being brown in a predominantly white country. So there was still a lot of kind of, it was mostly about being brown or being Indian. Now, I can only speak from that experience because I was born and raised here. I mean, if you go to India, I mean, unless you're in a major city, I mean, everybody's sort of, there's just like Mumbai is a very cosmopolitan city. There's people from all over versus growing up in like small town, small village India. But I can't really speak about that experience, Well,
that's fascinating, though, and for another day to think about and talk about. But one of the stereotypes that's true of you is the whole doctor thing. Your parents, your whole family, like, tell me about, first of all, what is that all about? The whole, Jewish people doctors, Indian people doctors, Asian, I don't know. Do you lose in many ways there? There's some problems with that stereotype?
So, okay, I think I need to be, I can only speak about my heritage and my lineage. You see, yes, my family is all physicians. My parents, their siblings, their children, aunts and uncles on both sides. And if people weren't physicians, they were in some kind of healing profession, dentistry, physical therapy. But even ancestrally, though, I actually come from a long line of healers. Like, if you go farther back up, my great-grandfather was one of the first anesthesiologists in Kashmir. And our last name, Wali, actually wasn't our original last name. It was a name that was bestowed upon us because someone way up in the lineage was being really helpful to people. And Wali, I think, is Arabic for friend or advocate. And so we became Wali. So there's helping and healing. That's kind of like deep in my blood, I guess. And I guess by the time I was born, I was like, you know what? We need to mix this up a little bit. I mean, yeah, I'll be a doctor. I came out of the womb holding a stethoscope, but maybe we can throw in some stand-up in the mix or something. So I sort of pivoted and added artistry into my life in some way.
That's awesome and important and makes you, I suppose, that much more different and dynamic within, folks in medicine that must think it's kind of, I don't know what they think. I don't want to make any assumptions about anybody who steps out and does, some kind of creative thing in addition to, I don't know, it's easy to stereotype people as kind of like right brain or left brain or whatever it is. This person's more of an engineer, but everybody can be an artist. So the fact that you've explored it and you've become actually a really successful stand-up comedian and doctor, and now with the podcast, it's like kind of more than just seeing patients or working at a clinic. Now you are giving advice to the public with a famous actor. What a cool opportunity with this podcast. Tell me a little bit about it, and then we'll turn the tables and pretend you're hosting it, because I just got a physical, and I'll tell you my maladies, which are minor.
Oh, I can't wait to hear.
They're minor.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for saying all of that. I mean, from a artistic sense, the podcast is one of the most challenging projects I've ever worked on, in the sense that, first of all, you really have to be completely present in the same way that when you're performing stand-up, you have to be completely present. In fact, I'm sure you've felt this, that, if you're performing and you're not completely there, fully embodied, the audience can tell.
Oh, yeah.
They can tell that his head's somewhere else. He's telling us these jokes, but he's not actually embodying the jokes. And so in the podcast, when I listen with my whole body. And then on top of just sort of that part of it, there's the mental brain, the sort of default programming, all of the things that I've learned as a physician that then need to come into play. And yet also I have to sort of humanize the whole process. Like I can't really use medical terms.
Right.
I need to speak in a civilian friendly language. And so it's very challenging, but I really love it. I really feel like I'm in my element. You know, I think we need to depict more doctors as human beings that have different facets. You know, we're not robots. We're humans that just happen to know a lot about the human body.
Yeah, and you do a really great job. The podcast is fascinating.
Oh,
I mean,
thank you.
The idea that also you're working with Sean Hayes and that's every episode. It's the two of you, but you also every episode interview another monster celebrity. Of course, he knows everybody. And you just had Conan O'Brien on, which you grew up apparently idolizing. I mean, how weird is it that you're the co-host to Sean Hayes? What's he like? And what's it like interviewing all these famous people? Do you ever get like nervous and starstruck, or does your doctor training kick in?
Yeah, no, it's actually really funny. There have only been a couple episodes. I remember when we interviewed astronaut Jessica Meir. I totally was fangirling and getting kind of flustered because she's so smart and accomplished. And I was just that was one where I actually remember getting a little nervous about it. When we interviewed Idina Menzel as well, I was super flustered and really fangirling. So it does come on sometimes. I think probably the theme is when I interview just really strong female identifying people. I just find it to be so inspiring and luscious, you know?
So basically you only get a little bit nervous when you're interviewing someone that is slightly more impressive than you are, like astronaut. like that's like astronaut, like or somebody else who is like you. Well, one time I got nervous when I was interviewing a surgeon who is also a clarinetist in the Boston Pops. That one got me because do you not play an instrument? Priyanka, come on.
Oh man. I mean, I grew up playing a little bit of piano, but I'm no instrumentalist.
You
like
are
Sean's an incredible pianist, but no, I'm not nearly
as impressed as I was just moments before. So I mean, it's in every episode you talk with someone about a health issue that they had. It's such a great idea for a podcast. I really enjoy it, and I think people are gonna love it. And but I almost feel like you could have done this weekly just on COVID related stuff and called it "Do I have COVID?" And if so, what am I supposed to do? And so it must be hard, but it's not. It's all kinds of different maladies.
I mean, but like, what don't you think people are sick of COVID? I mean, we sort of made this decision early on when we were sort of brainstorming the podcast that we weren't going to talk about COVID because that's all people hear. And it's like, we need something fresh. We need something different.
I think they aren't sick of COVID, and there's a ton out there. There's more on COVID than anything else. So why do that with your podcast? And there are obviously any number of other issues that people have. And that's what, so tell me just a couple that people have come on and what their issue has been for people.
Oh, yeah, no, totally. So gosh, I have so many different favorites. I mean, Conan was a great one because he's a great historian. So he had ocular shingles and he describes in very great detail the experience of ocular shingles. I don't know if you're a big fan of Hamilton, but I am. We had Leslie Odom Jr. and he had swine flu. This was way before he was famous. And, what I love about that story is he talks about just the sheer vulnerability and fear of being sick and not really having health insurance and just being so vulnerable, which I think is something many people can relate to.
For sure.
I remember one of our earliest episodes. It was one of the first ones that we recorded. Tig Notaro talked about getting a C. diff infection, Clostridium difficile, which, I've taken care of, but it's actually quite common and it's no joke, ironically, as funny as that episode was. But yeah, there's so many. There's just really so many I could go on. But yeah, that's just to name a few.
Your background, what is your degree and how can you, do you have to prepare? Do you know a little bit about what the guest, and you also take calls as well, are going to say so you can do the research and proper, you can't know everything off the top of your head, right?
Absolutely. So I study a lot for this podcast. I have been studying more for this podcast than I have for my board exam, and I'm double board certified in internal medicine and obesity medicine. So I study all the time for this thing, and it's super challenging because you have to, like I could learn or review 10 pieces of knowledge for this podcast, and we're only going to go over one thing, and then Sean will throw me a question that's like 5 other directions, right, and I kind of have to just know it. So it's been a good challenge for me to just be comfortable with saying, I don't know, or I'll get back to you on that, instead of just, my type A personality that wants to, do everything right, which, it really gets challenged here with just being comfortable with the unknown, being comfortable with saying, I don't know, which, by the way, when we interviewed Dr. Sanjay Gupta, that was another one where I was like, wow, I've looked up to this person for so long. And I'll never forget in that episode, he told me, he's like, there is a strength to saying, I don't know. And I was like, you know what? If Sanjay is down with I don't know, I'm going to embrace that too.
Yeah. That's the strength is not getting sued. You got
Uh-oh.
I mean, you're not worried. I guess you're not worried about that, but you are worried, obviously, about making sure that that whatever advice you're giving is as well researched as you can possibly do. So, all right, mine is then pretty simple and boring. I just got my first physical in 2 years. I guess that's not that bad. I'm 46. I just turned 46, and apparently my LDL cholesterol is high, and my vitamin D, I guess, is low. And so I've been prescribed a vitamin D supplement, and I guess I just have to watch my diet. So I looked those up, but
LDL. So couple of things, because I've lectured about this. So first of all, how high is your LDL? And when looking at cholesterol panels, we really want to focus more on the triglyceride to HDL ratio more than the actual LDL, because the thing about LDL is that you have to look at the particle size. LDL comes in different sizes. There's large LDL particles and small LDL particles. And the size matters. So there's a couple of follow-up tests that you can order to look at your LDL particle size to determine whether or not that high LDL is truly a risk factor or not. But I don't want to get in too many medical details.
My wife says she's always been happy with my LDL.
Okay.
In terms
that's nice.
I was just doing a bit out of your size matters. Sorry. And she says it's fine. So. By the way, does it matter? Does gender matter on cholesterol? Like, should I be Googling this? I shouldn't be Googling anything. I should be asking an expert like you, mainly my doctor, about like LDL for men of a certain age versus women of a certain age or cholesterol. So anyway, and you didn't even get to finish your answer, I don't think.
I mean, the short answer is there's a lot of variations with LDL. Some people are what are called hyper-responders. Some people have genetic issues that could predisposed to high LDL. Right. So there's a lot of variation. That's a very simple sort of answer to that.
146. That's my number.
Okay. What is your triglyceride to HDL ratio, though?
Oh, I don't know.
See, okay. Well,
they should give me that. I should have a sheet. This is another question about like I go to do the physical. I do, and then I just get, who I got a call from? Rite Aid. Your vitamin D prescription is ready. I'm like, what? Like, no one called me with my test result. I didn't know I had any of this, so I don't have the information that you're asking.
Yeah. So you found out you had low vitamin D through your pharmacist?
No, actually through my wife, who told me the pharmacy called. So even through like a fourth person.
Well, see, I think what you're hitting on is now another core issue. It's the systemic healthcare system and the way the way we're delivering healthcare, the way we're treating patients. I mean, you're not just this little ID number going through the machine. I mean, you're a human being with low vitamin D levels who deserves to know in a very kind of compassionate way of sharing information. So,
yeah, you know how compassionate they were. I was on hold for like 25 minutes with my doctor's office. And my ego did kick in at one point. I literally did say to myself something like, I wonder if they know who I am.
Yeah, right. So you were like, do you know who the hell I am?
I host a podcast from my shed.
On the air. Yeah.
Okay, so let me just then talk about an issue that you are really an expert on, which I think is a huge problem in this country. You know, it's your podcast is fascinating in that you take a new issue every week, and it's really entertaining and funny because you're there with one of the funniest human beings in the world, Sean Hayes, and you are a hilarious comedian, so you guys have great chemistry. So it's a fantastic idea.
Thank you.
And everybody should listen and subscribe to the podcast Hypochondriactor, by the way, and the link is in the show notes, and follow Priyanka and everything. But I feel like I want to ask you about the issue that is one of the biggest issues in the country in terms of healthcare, and is also a systemic issue, as you mentioned, which you really are an expert on, which is obesity. First, the stigma, and then the cure. I mean, there's so much to talk about with this. I care deeply about this because I was a personal trainer for a number of years before I became a successful comedian myself. And so I became very sensitive to causes and effects and emotional and so on about it. And so I thought maybe we could just talk, here about this one big issue, which you know so much about in our conversation today.
I mean, it's a huge problem, no pun intended. I mean, first of all, I think it's important that when we use the term obesity, we're talking about obesity-related complications. So it's not just about what a person looks like. We're talking about diseases that are associated with the term obesity. You see, someone can have a normal BMI, but they can have obesity-related complications like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, fatty liver, polycystic ovarian syndrome. These are all examples of obesity-related complications without the actual label of obesity. So I want to be really mindful about the terminology that we use. I
think that's a huge part about it. How do we talk about blank and being mindful of the terminology? I'm glad you gave that explanation before we jumped into it, because it matters so much. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. So I like to use insulin resistance as a better qualifying term, because essentially when insulin levels are too high, that leads to specific sets of complications that can fall under the umbrella of obesity associated complications. So all of the things that I listed, that's all comes down to insulin resistance. And insulin resistance is basically a syndrome, a hormonal imbalance syndrome in which one of the hormones in your body, specifically insulin, is higher than it should be. And we need insulin to live. But the thing is, when insulin levels get too high, then it leads to a slew of issues like weight gain, fatty liver, polycystic ovarian syndrome, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, specifically the accumulation of excess weight around the waist, which is a risk factor, heart attack, strokes, dementia. I can go on and on. Even erectile dysfunction is a symptom of can be a symptom of insulin resistance.
I want to just ask you your thoughts on the issue regarding, kind of a public policy approach in terms of, obviously, obesity or insulin resistance are not exclusive to people who are living in poverty. We know a lot of super wealthy overweight folks, and so it can all depend. But I wonder how you diagnose or how you think about the connection between the issue of living in poverty and health issues, especially obesity, because I think there's so many great policy solutions that would bring down the cost of health care for all American taxpayers that liberal, conservative, everybody would benefit from if we were all healthier, and trying to look at those that are living in poverty and diagnose the issue there and strike at the root of the problem is something I think a lot of public policy experts and doctors and physicians have been looking at. How do you see that issue? Am I on to anything?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked this question. So it really comes down to money. It comes down to the economy, and specifically the types of foods that are receiving government subsidies right now. So I'm talking about things like corn, which allows for the production of high fructose corn syrup, which is something that's very inflammatory. So part of the reason, a lot of those foods, they're cheaper. They're more affordable. It is a lot easier to buy a food item with high fructose corn syrup in it than it is to buy an organic piece of kale, which can be very pricey. And so we need to start shifting the narrative about what exactly are the types of foods that our government is offering subsidies for, because then if we can make the food more affordable, that'll be one of the many steps. But I mean, look, I'm not like running for president or anything like that. I mean, this is a huge systemic issue. And I think one of the biggest issues that we really need to talk about is the impact of racism in this country on the health outcomes of BIPOC individuals. The data shows that people who are from African American, Latino backgrounds, they have worse health outcomes. And there's data showing that these are still the residual effects of colonialism. So unless we begin to address racism within the healthcare system, we're going to still keep running into these same problems.
I'm so glad that you made that point. I've talked with a lot of people about that issue over the years, and it would seem that there's a lot of folks who are experts like yourself that point specifically to that issue. And I do think that, having a conversation about anything, we should be talking about those who are most vulnerable and how those of us who are less vulnerable and maybe have more advantage and privilege can help those folks who aren't get to where, frankly, I was born into. I think we get into this kind of moralizing conversation, which is so disgusting, too, that I somehow earned, my physical beauty. I probably did. But you know what I mean? The moral conversation just about certain people are worked harder than other people, lazy people, motivated. I mean, it's just it seems to pollute everything that we talk about when it comes to these issues, I suppose.
Yeah. And again, I'm not a DEIB expert or
what's DEIB?
Diversity, equality, inclusion, and belonging.
Got it.
So, I'm just a physician who is, trying to bring humanity back to medicine. But we do need to take a hard look at where our blind spots are in the medical community and where we are falling short for helping our BIPOC brothers and sisters. So, again, I'm not a health policy expert, but I can just point out that these are definitely issues that need attention.
What is, finally here, what is the trajectory, do you think, Priyanka Wali, of Priyanka Wali? I mean, look at what you're doing. You were just on the Kelly Clarkson show. I mean, I don't know what you thought when you were in medical school, how you were going to end up, but I mean, and it must be hard to go from the Kelly Clarkson show to the Stand Up with Pete Dominick podcast. You must have been really nervous to take that step up. But what's next? You're going to keep doing this podcast. You're going to keep doing stand up and hopefully guesting on other people's podcasts too, because there's so much advice to give and so much conversation to have, and you're a great source. So what's next?
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, no, I'm just very excited about what's coming up in the next couple of months. I can't speak in detail about the upcoming shows, but I mean, the team over at Hazy Mills is super hard at work and just got a really exciting slate of podcasts that will launch in 2022. So I'm just super, super excited to be doing this.
Well, my team and I are really excited to have you on. My team, it's just, this is the whole production staff. Anyway, Priyanka, it's so great to talk to you, and I hope to talk to you again. And I hope people will listen to your podcast and maybe submit their issue, their malady, their health
they should
concerns.
Totally call in. Yeah, for sure. We take callers, and we love talking about it. It's great.
Yeah, even though I just talked to you and now I can email you, I'm still going to just call in under disguised voices and be like, hello, I have an issue with some of my bowel movements. I don't know why. And then I'll
be like, Pete, is that you? Sean, it's Pete. Don't worry.
It's not me. It's not me again. I don't know why you would think it's Pete. Who is this person? Thank you so much, and congratulations on your fascinating, amazing, really cool, original career. And I hope to see you, cross paths doing stand-up at some point.
Definitely. Yeah, sounds good, Pete. Thanks again.
There
There you go, Dr. Priyanka Wali. And that was really great. I loved that conversation. Check out her podcast with Sean Hayes, Hypochondriactor. And there you have it. That is today's show. Nadine Farsad as well. So great. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you'll join me tonight for our Stand Up with Pete happy hour virtual hangout that we do most Thursdays at 8. But this week we'll do it Wednesday at 8 because I am performing the stand-up comedy at Levity Live this weekend with Craig Shoemaker, who asked me to join him on the bill. Then I'll be co-headlining a 3-headliner show on January 15th in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. And now it looks like we are going to add a date, an additional date the next day in South Jersey. So I know a lot of you are already talking about coming to the show in Pennsylvania, which is about an hour west of Philly. But now we're going to be also most likely, haven't signed this one yet, but it looks good. It's the next day, the 16th of January, January 15th and 16th, in South Jersey. Ophira Eisenberg, Christian Finnegan, and me all together. We hope to see you there. Tickets go on sale as soon as possible. I'll put a link in the show notes for the January 15th. Those tickets are already available. All right, that's it. I'm out of time. Thank you very much. John Carroll, Grammy Award-winning singer-songwriter, joins us each and every day here on the podcast, singing the song he wrote just for us. Well, for the whole world, really. It's time to stand up. Thank you, guys. Talk to you tomorrow. Love you. Bye-bye. See you tonight, I hope.
Just stand up. Stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.